Um, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Well, I'm the one who has lost my screen. I can't. All right. So you can see the promoting life.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, perfect. So let's start. Thank you guys for having me at, and it's such an honor to speak. And my philosophy is that if we can help one, it's worth it, and that's why I am here. So my name is Dr. Sacrifice Chirisa. I'm a specialist psychiatrist, among other things that I am. And I'm also working at CIMAS, the General Manager for Healthcare Services. I have been practically working in the medical industry since the late 1999, I think, from 2000 up to date. So today I'm going to just take you through a journey of mental wellness, and my presentation is going to take probably 30 minutes or less. Then I want to leave time for questions and then a discussion at the very end. So I will breeze through this, but focusing on drugs and rehabilitation. But I always want to start by, defining terms so that we can all be at the same page in terms of understanding of what we are talking about. So what WHO defines health as a state of complete physical and mental well-being and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease. And if you look at that definition, 2/3 of it are totally ignored in our normal settings. We just focus on the physical. We have our BP checks, we have our cancer screening, but we totally forget about the mental and the social well-being. Yet that is actually, the bulk of our health. And if that part is not taken care of, everything else will go into chaos. So what is mental health? Now, mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realize their own potential and can cope with normal stresses of life, work productively, fruitfully, and make a positive contribution to their community. So I want to, retaliate it very clearly that when your mental health is not well, it is very difficult to be fruitful. It's very difficult. In fact, you become destructive not only to yourself, but to the community and everything at large. And when you're now looking at addiction, now, most people call it addiction, but in our world, we call it substance use disorder. Now, it is defined as a condition in which there is uncontrollable use of a substance. Now, it can be anything, despite obvious harmful consequences. So it's either the person is getting into a series of accidents, a series of marital problems, financial problems, whatever harmful consequences of the substance use is causing in all the different dimensions of health, your financial health, your family, your social, your physical, but you continue to use the drug despite the obvious. So it's like everybody be saying, can this person not say it? And truly the person, that's when we actually then say somebody now has got a misuse disorder. And how you actually see and make a diagnosis of that is that the person has got an intensified focus of using a certain substance, and so their life is bent on going for the substance. So every day, all their money, all their effort, is to get the substance and use it. And they use it to a point that it impairs the ability of that person to function, to deal with every day-to-day stresses, to deal and to interact with colleagues, and also to meet expectations of life, of work, of family, and so they become impaired. And one of the things that you also see that they keep on using the drugs. I've already talked about that, while they know that they are giving them problems. They can also experience what are called withdrawal symptoms, commonly named as barbaras, So those are withdrawal symptoms. And every time you then stop the harmful substance, you go into a withdrawal. And so you have to keep on taking so that you can steady your nerves and actually function. So you hear people say, he has to take 1 or 2 for him to be well. He actually drives better when he's drunk. You know that person is experiencing withdrawals and is probably addicted. The other thing that you will see is what we call tolerance. Tolerance is where you have to use increasingly larger amounts of the same substance to experience the same effect that you previously had. And when all these things are together, you know that there is addiction, and we call it substance use disorder. And in Zimbabwe, a few years ago, I did a study of over 2,000 adults, and we were looking at, what are the things that were causing problems. And one of them we looked at were substances that were being used, and alcohol obviously is the most commonest substance that is abused. In fact, we actually saw that 5% of the adult population they actually suffer from alcohol use disorder and actually need treatment. So if you're 100 of us here, we definitely know that 5 of us have got a problem. Then now, and the second one, which is used, is marijuana or ganja, whatever you can call it, cannabis, grade, Malawian grade, whatever the case might be. And now, what we are now seeing that is taken a few years back, about 3 to 4 years back, bronco was very rampant, which is really a codeine-based cough mixture. And so the other substances that are in that class are your hystalics, your fentanyl, and all other things there. And now what we are seeing more is the crystal meth. So crystal meth has hit the streets all over, everywhere. And it's really now becoming probably the more, not the most used, but causing the most damage currently, among the populations, the youth, both in the high class and low class, middle class. It doesn't really matter. Crystal meth is now everywhere, and it goes by the name Mutoriro, Guka, and I mean each neighborhood has got its own name, but it's crystal meth or meth of. And it's really causing a lot of damage. And the other one that is a bit expensive is cocaine. Because of its price, the use is not as high, but we are seeing a lot of it, especially in the south of Samora, where most of you live. And so it's also a huge, big problem. And the other thing that we've also been seeing are drugs that we use for clinical drugs, your pethidine, very common now abused. So most of the commonly abused clinical drugs are usually the painkillers, your stopens, your pethidine, and things like that, your tramadols and all those. So one time I admitted a patient who was actually taking 30 stop pains per day. He would actually buy a tin of 1,000. How he got it, I do not know. I've got a patient a month ago who almost died by using pethidine. He injected himself 18 vials of pethidine in one day, and he almost died. So how do we get addicted? I think it's important for us to know that addiction, it's not somebody who is now failing. We must understand that addiction is a disease. It's a brain disease. And that's why most of the treatment is then done by mental health specialists, and because what happens is that with all addiction, whether it's gambling, whether it's shopping, whether it has to do what I call your pleasure center, which is a center in your brain. Now, that pleasure center in your brain, whenever you do anything that is pleasurable, you release a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical in your brain called dopamine. So when you release dopamine, that's why you feel the rush. You feel you enjoy. So you release the unnatural pleasure things that you can do. Eating can release dopamine. Sex can release dopamine. Exhilarating activities, can also release dopamine. Good music can release dopamine. And so what you then do is that whenever you release dopamine, your brain starts to learn and say, look, you know what? I'm feeling good and I want it again. So you then go for the next dose and you feel good again. And immediately your brain actually get addicted to the feel good. So that's why a person who's now addicted will use the substance despite their harm. In fact, experiments have been done with monkeys. And a monkey was given a choice of eating food or tapping something, and it would release an electrical impulse on the brain center, which then causes them to feel. They actually went hungry. They actually died from hunger, but they were still pressing that electrode in their pleasure center. So when your pleasure center is activated, everything else falls away. That's why you see that when somebody is addicted, they do not care about their family, they don't care about their work, they don't care about, it's not that they are, but the brain has simply shifted and say, you know what, our focus is getting this substance. That's how we get addicted. So the addiction pathway is a common pathway, and it can be started by anything. So new drugs are being discovered every day that will cause addiction. So in other countries, you've got your you've got your designer drugs, and so we are going to be seeing much more of that, especially as the world becomes very free. So it doesn't really matter what's causing the addiction, but at the brain level, it's doing the same thing. In fact, it has been seen that when you use like cocaine, the amount of dopamine released in your pleasure center is more than the amount of dopamine that is released in your pleasure center when you're having an orgasm. I stopped because I want you to understand how powerful these drugs are. So with cocaine, you can actually get addicted with one dose. That's why the dealers, they give you the first dose, because the first dose is good enough to get you hooked. Because your brain will just say, ooh, and it wants it, and it wants it again and again until it destroys your life. So what then happens? So we have looked at the effects on the brain, but what we have seen is that there are physical effects. So people that are using alcohol, they can end up having liver cirrhosis. I've got a gentleman that I'm treating right now. His liver is fried. He's only 39, and he needs a liver transplant. And where can you get it? So he has just cut his life. He'll probably live maybe a maximum of 2 years. You can have memory problems. You can have accidents. You can have, one of the psychiatric illnesses that we see is especially suicide. A lot of suicide with drug use, because you get to a point where your life is not moving. At first, it's fun. Then it stops being fun, and it's now a huge problem. And I always say that there are four outputs or three outputs to drug abuse. Number one, you're going to end up in jail because you're going to do something because you're under the influence. Number two, you're going to end up dead, either by accident or by suicide. Number three, you're going to end up in a mental institution, because some of these drugs will cause psychosis, which is called substance-induced psychosis. Or you're going to end up being a vagabond, a person who is not living up to the potential that you were supposed to have. And so so when you're dealing with these things, we deal with depression, we deal with confusion, we deal with blackouts, we deal with epilepsy, with brain damage. But the main thing is that there's a lot of damage in your brain, and it will come and bite you. So what am I talking about today mainly? I'm talking about, is there hope for our friends? Is there hope for you? And I will tell you a story a few years back. I'm 44 now. A few years back, when I was much young, in my 20, around the age of 28 or so, I had two friends, very good friends. We were at the university. These guys were doctors. One of them then shot himself with a shotgun after we had gone for a party. Those any gun can shoot type of parties, which started on a Thursday, ended on a Sunday, and that Sunday afternoon, he shot himself with a shotgun. The other one was a sad one, because this guy was my friend all the way from high school, Mazoe, and we were together in medical school, and we graduated together, and we were all doctors. And this guy died from an overdose of these drugs. So I know what I'm talking about because it happened very close to home. So what is rehabilitation? So rehabilitation is a form of treatment used on patients to decrease or to stop abuse, to enable them to become productive. Because we know that once you are hooked to drugs, your productivity, you cannot contribute positively to family. These are the people at funerals. You don't want them. You don't want them at parties. They spoil their parties. They, I'm sure everybody has got a cousin like that or a friend like that. And so rehabilitation is the way forward. And who needs it? Everybody who has got physical dependence. How do you know that you've got physical dependence? We know you've got physical dependence when you stop using any substance, be it alcohol, pethidine, drugs, stopping, and you go into withdrawal. You start shaking, you start sweating, when you're experiencing that, you know that you are now physically dependent. There's also what is called psychological dependent. It's a learned behavior. So you need it to feel normal. You need it to control your emotions. And some people actually use substances because they are having, mental disorders like depression, anxiety. So they've now learned that if I use this, I calm my nerves. If I smoke weed, it calms me down. If I drink alcohol, it calms me down. Or if I'm depressed, if I take cocaine, it heightens me up. So we call that self-medication, and can lead to serious problems. So anybody who is having problems and having those symptoms, you need to be rehabilitated. And there are different types of models. There's the AA model, there's the traditional Minnesota model, therapeutic communities, 12 steps, We use a modified Minnesota model in our addiction treatment. So there are different types. Some use spirituality, some use this. There is no one method that we can say is the best, but people just use something that they are used to. And there is a method that I'm used to, and that's what I use. And I got this when I was, attached in Cape Town for some time when I was my master's. That's where we actually saw and were exposed to these treatment models that we are now using in Zimbabwe. So as from the 2015, we have been using this. And what what we offer is inpatient facilities, short stays to de-escalate situations. With family, with wife, at work, when somebody is uncontrollable, and when somebody needs to detox, and some of these, it's so difficult to do home detox because they need to be actually monitored medically, because if they actually stop without medical cover, they can actually die. They can actually go to what is called with alcohol called delirium tremens, which is called a 5% lethality if not controlled. So it's so difficult for somebody to go through detox and de-escalate themselves from addiction. And usually they would have tried 1, 2, 3 days without stopping, 2, 3 months without stopping, but without the change of framework of mind and thoughts and thought pattern, it's so difficult. And all those things that we are doing. And so we have to go through the medical detox. Is very key, because this is what stops most people from going through, even if they have decided. So they'll say, you know what, I want to stop. So for 3-4 days they stop, and then they start having the withdrawals. They are so nasty, they are so painful. So the person will do everything to stop those detox, and they relapse and go back. So we need to manage it, but it is not treatment. It is only the first step to dry the person out. And depending on the drug, this can take between 7 to 14 days. Then you use psychotherapy. This is more like counseling and behavioral therapy. These are so important because your brain has to learn how to replace, activities. Instead of drug use, what are you going to use? Drug resistance skills, your motivation, problem solving, your interpersonal relationships. what we know is that by the time somebody now needs rehabilitation, they would have messed up with their family, with their friends. They would have used up their social equity, and there's actually need for that person to use borrowed, borrowed faith, borrowed trust. And so there's a lot of things that are needed there, including family therapy. And how you do it with individuals, you do it as a group, you do it goal setting, occupational, and you also look for things like suicide, because it's very, very common. Suicide, depression, psychosis, bipolar, some, and even anxiety. These are very common things in that space, and you always search for them. So for all our patients, we always search for suicide, we always search for depression, always search for psychosis. And what we have seen is that quite a number of them, almost a third of the patients that we see, will have one of these. And so while you are doing the drug treatment, you have to treat the underlying psychological issue that would have either been there or was precipitated by the drug abuse. I'm not going to talk about the occupational health. What are the success rates of rehabilitation? Now, success, there's no program which is 100% success. There isn't. Anybody who tells you that if you come to us, we'll treat you and it is guaranteed, there isn't. Number one, it will depend on the age that the person has been using the drug. It will depend on the number of drugs that are being used. It will depend on the length of use that has been there. It will depend on the circumstances that are surrounding in terms of environment, social support. What does he have, and all those things. It also depends with the presence of of psychological diseases like depression, psychosis, bipolar, and all those things, the level of damage that would have happened. So to give a blanket and say what 60%, all these things are things that depend, that actually sort of contribute to the success rate. But on average, we look at between 60 to 70 at best. So there are patients that will recover and do well. There are patients that will do well and then slip a bit, do well, slip a bit. And then there are patients that we actually say will not do well. But what I say is that everybody deserves a chance. Let's not say that this person will not recover. Some of the people that you think you're not going to recover might actually be the best that they will actually recover. What is most important is the personal motivation of that person. So we work on motivation, and we also work on the social support, and especially the friends. And I'm so happy that I'm speaking to guys from Georges, because you are a community of your own, and you need to then be able to rescue others from the fire. And so this is what we have here in Harare. We've got Highlands Wellness Group, which is a group of 3 hospitals in Highlands. The first one is in Highlands. It's called Highlands Halfway House. It's in Highlands, the number 71 Orange Grove. It was our first facility that we opened in 2015. It's an 18-bedded facility. It's shared. All of them, they run the same program for rehabilitation, but this one is our entry point. Not that it is bad, it's actually very good, but what we then discovered is that as we went on, we then needed to stratify the facilities. Then we've got Borodo Halfway House. It does have some private rooms, even if the shared rooms, they are like 2 in a room, so it's slightly higher up, slightly more, also more expensive. It's 17 bedded, same thing. So and then the last one is what we call our Mandara Manor. It's a wellness, it's really a world class. This is like a hotel for your high class. It's more expensive, much more expensive, almost times 2 of the other 2, all private rooms. But the treatment is the same. It even has a massage parlor, it's got a gym and all those things, world class. And we actually we actually get people from other countries, from the UK, from South Africa, that are actually coming to use this one. Why am I sharing all this? It's what we want to say is that we don't want to be looking like right now in our own class, in my own class, graduating class. We are actually helping a brother out. he's lost his way, and we went and said, guys, we've got this guy, let's rescue him. And people are bringing in money, and he's coming in for rehabilitation. We talked to him, he's agreeable, and we are rescuing one person at a time. And you can do it as a school, you can do it as a class, and that's what we are looking for, looking out for each other and giving each other that second chance. So what do we do there? We've got the rehabilitation. We also do our own drug tests, outpatient management, counseling of family therapy, couples counseling, individual mental health promotion. It's a multidisciplinary team led by specialists, and the team and the founder of all these hospitals. We've got clinical psychologists on site, occupational therapists on site, psychiatric nurses on site. So it's a really it's the first of its kind, where we've got a holistic and the whole component actually coming through. Let me round up and leave time for questions. But what I want to say is that mental health is so real. In fact, 1 in 4 adults is at some point in their life, at any one time, they are suffering from a mental health illness. Addiction is one of them, or substance use disorders, but there are so many. There are over 450 types of diagnosis in the mental health world: depression, bipolar, eating disorders, insomnia, not sleeping enough, anxiety. There are just so many, and now we are starting to see dementia, cognitive problems, epilepsy, temporal lobe epilepsy, memory losses, all those things. So if you and one of the most important things is, do not wait for others to say you need help. Take the responsibility for yourself to get the help that you need. Ladies and gentlemen, I think with those few words, I'm open for questions. I'll stop sharing my screen, and so that we can have an interactive, and I'll ask, and you might not even ask a question on what I have presented. You can even ask outside. What I want is for this session to be as helpful as possible, and we've got about probably 25 minutes or 20 minutes for that. So over to you, Chair, and I'm here for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chirisa. My apologies, Zim internet issues on all the service providers I was trying to use, but thank you for the presentation. Maybe just for the guys who are tuned in, I'll just share your CV briefly, so that they can have an understanding, a deeper understanding of your expertise and some of the accomplishments that you've had. So basically, Dr. Chirisa is the current general manager of CIMAS Health Services. He began the role at the beginning of the year. He is also a highly sought after pastor, business and entrepreneur, mentor, and specialist psychiatrist. If you go on Facebook, you can actually look for Dr. S.M Chirisa, and you will see he's got a number of business mentorship, family mentorship, and so on videos that help people in business, also help people with the different areas of their lives, whether it's personal development, whether it's marriage. So he's a multifaceted man. He's a flourishing entrepreneur. He's founded 5 hospitals. He's already outlined some of the, 3 of the hospitals, the wellness group, which are all firsts of their kind in Zimbabwe. And I have been to them, especially when you go to Mandara Manor. You will not believe that you are in Zimbabwe. If you've ever been to a very, very high-end resort in a place like Bali or somewhere there, you will feel completely at home at the Mandara Wellness Center. He also opened Makoni 24-hour medical center. He pioneered the 24-hour medical center phenomenon in this nation. He's also an author of 6 books, and he writes weekly on mental health, business topics, and entrepreneur issues as well. He's very happily married to his lovely wife, Pastor Dorcas Chirisa, and they live, well, they're with their children. Some are in boarding, and then they're all in boarding, aren't they, Doc? Yeah, all his children are in boarding. And he also co-founded Wisdom City Ministries International Church. Some of his key consultations and notable achievements: he's been the group medical consultant for Lafarge, for National Foods, for Unilever South and East Africa, for Qualcomm Foods, for Metal and Gold, for Schweppes, Willow Vale, Mazda Motor Industries, Gold Star Sugars. It's a very, very long list. He's also the former National Treasurer and National Secretary General for the Zimbabwe Medical Association. He is the former Deputy Director of Mental Health at the Ministry of Health head office here in Harare. He's also been a board member of the City of Harare Medical Board. So he's spoken internationally. Yeah, his CV is quite lengthy, but just so that you have an understanding of who you are dealing and his broad experience. So please feel free to ask what you'd like to ask. We brought him in.
Pastor, you're
Obviously,
quite bad, so we're losing you a bit there.
we've seen a trend, and it's unfortunate. I think last month or 6 weeks, we've actually lost all Georgians to suicide. And we really feel that it's an issue that to be addressed.
Okay, we seem to have lost.
By us as old boys. It's also who is with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Something that is helping, but as former classmates and another, we can help one another, and we will lose lives as non-medical people. To get into the questions, Doc, I think it's clear, given altogether, sounds like a silly, it's such an appealing, quitting drugs as an escape from the.
Okay, I think we lost.
Can you hear me, Doc?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. So yeah, I think from the chat.
Unmute?
Yeah, I think from the chat that my mic is now on.
Okay.
I think what
I've just had to mute him because we'd lost him there. So Doc, maybe if you picked up anything from what he was saying, if you want to address that, then we've got a couple of questions in the chat. And Shingai, I can see your hand is raised. Anybody else wants to ask questions, you can raise your hand or post to everyone in the chat, and then we'll take the questions one at a time. So if you want to address maybe Pastor Mgoe's question first, Doc, and then we can deal with the questions in the chat.
Yeah, so I will tell you for a fact, drugs are bad news, especially when you go to your hard drugs, your cocaine, your meth. Those ones, they will not, you should not even doubt into them, because you can get hooked up by one dose and it will really pull you into a hole that you are not able to. There are some drugs that you say, like alcohol, you say you have controlled drinking. There are WHO recommendations in terms of how many units you need to be, a person can drink per day, per week, in females or males. But if I tell you those units, most of you who are drinking will say, then I should, But I will tell you that there are other drugs, those ones will mess you up. And what we are now seeing, that we are seeing a lot of psychosis, and one of the things is that some of them are stimulants, so they cause you to become very high, but you then and have a trip where you are seeing things or hearing things or whatever you do on that trip. But when you then come crashing down and you go into a depressive or in a depression where you want to really kill yourself and throw yourself off buildings and shoot yourself and all those kind of things. So some of them are a definitely no. The other ones, maybe we can have another and to say, what can you do with alcohol? Obviously, my stance is that I used to be part of that. I used to drink. So these stories that I told you of my two friends, I wasn't just there watching. I was doing that with them. But I then saw how destructive they were in their lives, how they destroyed their families, how they destroyed them until they lost their lives. And for me, at that point, it was a turning point where I had to go and say, I cannot do this anymore, and I had to stop. I still remember being admitted for some of those. So I always tell my clients that, look, at one time I was sitting on that chair and experiencing those problems, but I had to leave because there's a point where you cannot reduce. You have to go for sobriety and to stop. So remember that addiction is a spectrum. All of us, we enter into a drug abuse. We are introduced by peer to suit. It's fun for some time. Then we progress until we are at the end of the spectrum, which is addiction. So when you're looking at a person, you are looking and say, where is this person? Is he at the addiction end? Where are they in between, which we call the abuse stage or introduction? So depending on which stage of the spectrum they are, the interventions are different and will be able to help. Sometimes we actually admit people that are Form 3s, Form 4s, they are not addicted, yes, but they are starting to abuse. So you do the interventions there. And one of the things that I always do is I want them to see the end stage, and what will happen, it becomes a wake-up call for them. For some of them, they may not need the full rehabilitation. They just need to be dried up. You have interventions in between, and you might actually win them.
That's great.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that contribution. Shingi, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly ask for Paul. Paul had asked a question, or one or two questions, and then Shingi will get to you to ask your question directly. So Paul asks, he says, thank you for the presentation and info. Please advise on any recommended approaches to identifying the signs of abuse, as they're not always clear. That's the first part of the question. Then second, he says, any recommendations on approaches to engaging those suffering from addiction and mental illness? So I just asked Paul's question first, because I know Shingi is extremely passionate. So be prepared for Shingi's questions too. So before Shingi's questions, if you wouldn't mind just getting to Paul's one.
No, thank you. So if you looked at my earlier presentation, I looked at how the things that you look at or we look at to make the diagnosis that somebody is addicted. We look at the continued use of a substance despite their harm. This harm can be financial, can be marital, can be physical, but if somebody continues. There's also increased use of the drugs, now taking so much amounts to have the same use. We call that tolerance. There's also focused use, that all their energy and plans have to do with the use of drugs, how to get it. They start selling things, selling cars. I had a guy who had 3 houses in Borodale, sold all of them, and is now living in a cottage. He had that as inheritance. And so all their things that they are now doing is focused on that, withdrawals. So you can actually see somebody going down the drain. You can also, some of them will have physical effects. For example, meth, crystal meth, it affects your appetite, so you will not be eating. So the person becomes so thin, so shriveled, and you can actually tell that somebody is on crystal meth. So then there's the psychological signs where somebody starts to avoid, they start to use the change group, they are no longer participating, they disengage from things like this. So when you see anybody just pulling and isolating themselves, you know that there's something that is wrong. Those are some of the early signs that you can look at. The second part was what? Sorry, Kumbi, the second part.
Okay, it says any recommendations on approaches to engaging those suffering from addiction and mental illness?
So I totally agree that, look, it's a difficult approach to approach somebody or your friend and say, you know what, you need help. It's a difficult conversation, but we must be prepared to have difficult conversation. The Bible that I read, it just says, it says that wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy. So I believe that if you are a true friend, you must be able to confront somebody and say, you know what, I think you need help. And sometimes what I normally do, I actually, because this question is asked over and over, even the relatives themselves, sometimes they want to bring somebody and somebody is saying, I'm okay, and they resist, but what we normally do is that the first thing is you approach the person, sit down, tell them, Shamari, we are concerned and we want to help you. We feel good, the things that get out of hand or are getting out of hand, and you need help. And we are here to offer you that help, And sometimes you might have to engage the wife, the brothers, and the family and get their support. At the other end of the spectrum, within our context, especially in Zim, we've got what is called the Mental Health Act. The Mental Health Act then allows, especially the relatives, if they see that this person is now a danger to themselves and a danger to others, to have that person admitted without consent. So, to be honest, there are some people that you have to go that route, but that is the end point. The best route is to have somebody who you talk to and he agrees. And that would be the best. But sometimes, when somebody is about to go into into a fire, do you let them fall into the fire and say, I told them, but they refused? Sometimes you have to rescue them by force. So there is a law that then allows you to activate that. But obviously, it's best done by the relatives. And some point, obviously, as friends, you can only go that far. But involving the family and the people that are close might be the way in. But I've seen people coming to us from friends. In fact, they just communicate with the relatives. Sometimes they won't be having money, because by the time somebody is really addicted, the capacity and the ability to pay for some of these services will be lost. But I want to tell you that I've seen people bouncing, going back to work, going back to their families, going back to their businesses and doing well. So it's worth it to try. That's why I say that everybody deserves a chance. Over to you, Kumbi.
Super, thank you very much for the comprehensive answer, Doc. Right, I'm going to ask Shingi to unmute himself and ask his questions or questions directly. Shingi, over to you.
Great, thanks, Kumbi. Thank you, Doctor, for a very comprehensive discussion. I'm interested in potentially much earlier in the cycle, before we get to those extremes of substance abuse, etc. I've been following the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She was recently appointed the Surgeon General in California, and she talks of what she calls adverse childhood experiences, which she says are, in her view, the single greatest unaddressed public health crisis affecting USA today. And in that, she's talking of preventable and traumatic early experiences that can range from violence, poverty, neglect, to physical and emotional and sexual abuse that people experience as children. And how that triggers the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, i.e. our fight or flight response, and how when that is continuously triggered because of continuous abuse, that then becomes very maladaptive and damaging to the development of a child, which then manifests as toxic behavior when people get older. So what I'm interested in understanding is when people present as functional, i.e. a person is still able to hold down a job, a person is still able to look like they are functioning in society, but one just observes that this behavior, aggression, argumentativeness, hypersensitivity, and so forth, seems to indicate that we're possibly dealing with some form of functional depression as an individual consideration. And then as it then now starts to become a collective consideration in a group setting, I'm then wanting to understand what tools do we have to begin to address what look to be maladaptive behaviors, but look somewhat socially functional. I'm not sure if my question was clear.
It's clear, obviously. You are a well-read man, but it's perfectly clear, and I can explain it in much simpler terms. So, in a week's time, I'm actually doing on Saturday. If you guys can log in and on at my at my YouTube page and Facebook page, Dr. S.M Chirisa, I'll actually be doing a parenting class. And not to preempt it, in that parenting class, we are looking at childhood traumas, the different types of childhood traumas, starting from neglect, abuse, and the difference and the best way of the different modes of parenting and their effects and the best way of doing it. So we know and definitely know that in terms of your psychological makeup, the ages of between 8 and 11 are very key and formative to your psychological makeup or baseline, or even much earlier. Childhood experiences do have effects, but every time, when we actually admit people and do our psychological survey, we actually start to survey the patient from birth. The effects. We speak to the parents. We speak to childhood memories. We go and look for those crisis and stress moments and events that could have fractured the psychological map of an individual. So rightly so, that is something that we are pretty aware. And there are tools that you can use to actually pick up some of those things, and some of them are actually online, and they are very simple. For example, there's one that I normally use as routine in all the people that we admit, which is called the PHQ-9, or Patient Health Questionnaire 9. It is able to pick up depression, is able to pick up anxiety. I also use other self-reporting tools, or tools that you can actually call the assist. It's able to pick up whether somebody has got substance abuse. There's also the audit for alcohol, or the CAGE screen. So there are quite a number of screens that we can use. There are also screens for bipolar, for anxiety, for all kinds, which are more academic, but we actually use them for cognitive function to see whether this person, drugs have not fried his brain. Is he able still to think, to reason? Cognitive tests. We use the MOCA, the Montreux cognitive assessment. So we've got a robust battery of tools that you can use. But obviously, the most important thing is the clinical history. It is that interview, the ability to understand a person, where they're coming from, their point of view, their personality, their strengths, their weakness, their explanation model, their ego defense mechanisms, which are about 12 of them. So it's really a robust way, which I cannot go into because I will make you all psychiatrists. But one thing I can assure you, that in Zimbabwe, we've got the capacity, we've got the expertise, we've got what is needed, such that there's no need for anybody who needs rehab to be going to the UK or going to South Africa. In fact, we want those people to be coming to Zimbabwe, and we'll be able to really help them. So yes, childhood issues they have, and as as we deal with that part, those are some of the things that we deal with. For example, in females, 25% of all females in adults, they've been sexually abused at some point. So though there are issues, and we are now seeing the issues of abuse in males that also rising, and it was maybe covered, but more people are now coming out and to speak. So the issues, but we, in psychiatry and psychology, we'll have to deal with those unresolved issues, and you put closer to them, or you encapsulate them by psychotherapy, and then you move on. And because the aim is to be functional. And the other thing that I also wanted to say is that when it comes to functionality, we divide mental disorders into what I call major mental disorders and minor. Minor is that you have got things happening, but you are able to function. You can still go to work, you can still be married, but you've got issues happening and which are troubling you. Your anxiety, your depression, your personality disorders. You are functioning, but you are causing a lot of stress within your world or within yourself. Then you've got major ones are the ones that makes your life stop functioning, but they are still mental disorders. You understand what I'm saying? So not everything is major. There are things that are in the class of major, which will be apparent to everybody that something is wrong. Then there are some things that you on face value, you won't see, but somebody will be having experiences psychological pain, or you'll be saying, you know what, I'm not quite sure about this person, but there's something, but you cannot put your finger to it. So we know that it's also a spectrum from being normal, mild to moderate to severe and extremely severe. So we are able to deal with all those spectrums.
So if I can just follow up on that, because I think my main area of concern is where you talk of the minor mental disorders, and then you talk of the ego defense mechanisms, because that's what I'm really interested in. What's the so what? What can one do when you are in a group setting? You are observing very clearly. This group setting is very clearly demonstrating minor mental disorders. Then when you try to bring it up, you see then the ego defense mechanisms then kicking in. That's what I'm fundamentally curious about. What is possible to be done when there's a defensiveness that actually defends toxicity, right? But it's very, very clear. It's clear to you, it's clear as day. This is a toxic environment, but it defends its own toxicity. My question is, what are the tools that are available to be able to address that?
Now, what I'm saying, but it's your question is to do with how humans behave, how humans think, because everybody is designed to defend and to maintain their ego. Everybody is cued to defend themselves. So even if you're doing something wrong and I tell you, hey, you're doing something wrong, you say, this is the way I want it, even if you know that it's wrong, but you defend yourself. It's a natural way of doing things. That's how human beings maintain their integrity or mental integrity. But some of those ego defense mechanisms are negative, and they are different. They can be minimization, catastrophizing, projection, and saying that it's not my fault, it's my father, it's the government, it's the school that I went to, and not taking responsibility. Those are all defense mechanisms. Some will just stonewall and all those kind of. So you've got this mix of defense mechanisms that you deal with. But what the most important thing is what you guys have done today. What needs to be done is that there is need to have awareness of mental health issues early. And what we have left, especially in our Black community, is that we have left it late. You understand what I'm saying? And we don't appreciate, we believe that if somebody is having mental problems, there are demons, there are mamepe kumusha kwao and things like that. So it's our explanatory method that has actually left us behind. If we talk about this more, if we go into the different major ones and say, okay, the next time let's talk about depression, let's talk about suicide, let's talk about psychosis, let's talk about bipolar, these issues which are major that we see rising very often, but we have never really talked about them. So I cannot go into each topic right now because it took me 4 years to learn all the 450 different types of, but they are major or common, what we call common mental disorders. And what we need to do is to raise awareness, especially in platforms like this. If you could say every year you have got 2 or 3 sessions on mental health, and that makes sense because after a certain time you are now equipped. And even a person who has it, one of the things that I've seen people, when we do platforms like this, some people will be quiet, but nicodemically they'll come in the middle of the night and say, doc, I think I was that one. It's better. At least the person is now coming out. Why? Because he has been empowered by knowledge and awareness. So I want to thank you guys for really coming through and organizing something like this, because the only way, the tool against all these ego defense mechanisms that you're talking about is awareness. And we can now start to say, you know what? I think we can do something about our brother, or I think I need to do something about myself, and then we need to do something about this group, because you are now empowered by the information that you guys would have had. But I totally agree. I cannot give you and say close the group or start a new group or whatever. I think let's empower the group and to say that there is a situation, or look, this is not normal, there is a problem and something can be done about it. Thank you, Kumbi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you, Shingi. Another question's come in here, and this is from Tapiwa. It says, Dr. Chirisa, thank you so much for your time and presentation. I found your comment about there being over 400 mental health disorders very pertinent. It seems to me in this age of connectivity and work from home demands, digital addiction and especially social media addiction is becoming highly prevalent and perhaps more dangerous than it initially appears. Do you have any recommendation on how to manage this?
Okay, so we are actually dealing with social media when we are doing our parenting. I've got a clinical psychologist from the UK who is actually going to do a presentation on dealing with social media, especially with teenagers. So it's something that we're. So remember what I said at some point in my presentation. I did say that addiction, there is an addiction center. I was trying to tell you the science of addiction. So the science of addiction is the same. It doesn't matter whether it's sex addiction, whether it's gambling, whether it's social media addiction, it's drugs. They all use the same pleasure center. The stimulant can be different, but at the end of the science, it's still the same thing. So in terms of treatment, you actually use the same treatment for drugs, for gambling, for social media, for shopping. As long as it is addiction, you actually use the same modality, because it is hijacked. So it's not so much of the thing, but it's so much of the pathway that has now been hijacked. So it's a common pathway. And that's why I even say that we are going to have so many things that are going to cause addiction in the future. But all of them, they are treated the same because of the common pathway that then leads to addiction. So social media is one of those things that have come. Gambling, before there was gambling, people never used to gamble. But when it was made, now people are addicted. They cannot sleep. They'll sell their house. They'll sell anything. They'll continue to gamble, even though they know that they are, and they need to gamble more and more. So if you look at the issues, it's still the same. It's just like the social media. You start once, you get pleasure. You start more, so you increase your tolerance, which means you increase the quantum. It's just like pornography. It's an addiction. You can actually, you just watch a pornographic video, then you watch it again. And then you are now starting to, because of increased tolerance, just like you have to increase the amount of alcohol to get the same pleasure, you have to increase the amount of of pornography, and you also have to increase the amount of people in that pornography and the extremities of that pornography, until it messes you up. So, but at the science level, at the brain level, it's still one disease, addiction, caused by all these things. So we can be able to give you, things, and we have rightly done so, where we actually detox a person from social media, just like we detox a person from alcohol and drugs. But social media has become a big addiction. Gambling has become a big addiction. Pornography is now a big addiction, sex addiction, and all those kind of things. So there are different types of addictions. Today, we just looked at one aspect of it, which is just drug. But in terms of treatment, it's actually the same. Over to you, Kumbi.
Doc, thank you very much for your time. There's no further questions in the comment section, and we are just a little bit over our time, so I don't want to keep you detained any longer than necessary. Look, I just want to thank you for the presentation, the knowledge you've imparted today, and I think for me and for the community, the Old Georgians, Kubatana community, as well as the wider Old Georgians family, I think this is the start of a discussion and a journey between us and you as well. And I'm sure a lot of guys couldn't attend this evening, but this has been a discussion, a very hot discussion topic. Unfortunately, we've lost a couple of boys within the last couple of weeks too, actually. So it's actually been the most intense, incidents of this sort of thing happening, and both to suicide, unfortunately, within the last 2 weeks. So it's been an urgent issue for a number of years, and it's really taken on an extreme level of urgency given what's happening. Obviously, there are wider pressures because of the impact of COVID, work situations, but the bottom line is, every life lost is a life too many. And we've been looking at ways and means. It doesn't point to a crisis, but it does point to an opportunity for us to be able to find a way to put in place mechanisms through which we can intervene and help guys to understand that, look, there are options and that there are people available to talk. There are support mechanisms that are in place. So I think for me personally, I'm really looking forward to exploring this ground further with you. And I know there are a couple of guys on the call this evening who are taking active interest in this conversation topic with a view to the same sort of outcome, that we get the right structures in place, the right mechanisms, the right processes, so that as boys are leaving the college and joining the Old Georgians community, that we have a place for them to be able to come, a safe space that they can come and learn that being a man is actually, part of being a man is the ability to be able to recognize when you're in trouble and recognize when the right time to actually speak up. I think the greater concern has been, who can I trust to help me offload this burden? Where can I go that I'll be received and begin the road to healing? So there's a lot we can go on the whole night. I'm sure we're all extremely passionate about this subject. I just wanted to thank you for your time this evening, as well as Pastor Mgoe for organizing this for us this evening. And I hope that you'll be able to avail yourself once we've had a chance to just to digest what we've taken in this evening and work on the next phase of our plan, and then we can engage further. I also would like to recognize Dr. Arthur Garande, who is the Director of Jesuit Ethos at St. George's College. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and it's really heartening to see you on the call, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of opportunities for us to engage further on a wider level anyway. So thank you very much for joining us. And thank you guys who managed to come in this evening. We look forward to engaging with all of you further as well. And have a really terrific weekend, everyone. Thanks once again, Doc, and we'll chat to you soon, I hope.
Thank you, and good night, everybody. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you. And you can count on me for anything if you want anything in the future.
Superb. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.